It was supposed to be a joke, but the unease that settled in my gut told a different story. My wife, Alexandra, and our friend Julian had a way of blurring the lines between reality and fantasy. We'd been friends with Julian and his wife, Sophia, for years, and I'd grown accustomed to their antics. But this time they'd crossed a line. Alexandra and I had met in college, and we'd built a life together, brick by brick. 2 beautiful kids, a lovely home, and a comfortable routine. It was the American dream. But beneath the surface, I'd been feeling a growing sense of discontent. Alexandra's quirky sense of humor, which I'd once found charming, now seemed like a thin veil for something more sinister. Her friendship with Julian had been making me increasingly uncomfortable, like a slow-burning fire that I couldn't ignore. Julian was a charmer, always ready with a joke or a prank. But I'd begun to suspect that he had an ulterior motive, that his friendship with Alexandra was a mere facade. I'd tried to brush off my concerns, but they lingered in the back of my mind like a ghost. That evening, we were at Julian and Sophia's house for dinner. After the meal, Julian suggested I help him with a project in his basement. Alexandra followed us downstairs, and I didn't think much of it at the time. But as we worked on the project, I began to feel a sense of unease. Julian was being overly friendly, and Alexandra seemed to be lapping up his attention like a cat in cream. As we finished up, Julian turned to me and said, "I think we've got everything under control here. Why don't you go back upstairs and join Sophia?" I nodded, but as I turned to leave, I caught Alexandra and Julian exchanging a glance. It was a fleeting moment, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I went back upstairs, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. But as I sat down next to Sophia, I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Was Alexandra really just being friendly, or was there something more to it? The question swirled in my mind like a toxic fog, refusing to dissipate. As the evening wore on, I found myself growing more and more agitated. I tried to push the thoughts aside, but they lingered in the back of my mind like an uninvited guest. And then, just as we were about to leave, Julian made a comment that made my blood run cold. "I think we've had a great evening, don't you?" Julian said, his smile lingering on Alexandra like a whispered secret. "Maybe we can do it again sometime soon." I felt a spark of anger ignite within me, but I forced myself to remain calm, to play it cool. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, my voice even, but my heart racing like a trapped animal. Julian just laughed, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, come on, it was just a joke." But I knew it wasn't just a joke. I knew that something was simmering beneath the surface, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And as we left Julian and Sophia's house that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that my marriage was teetering on the edge of a precipice. As we drove home, my mind was a jumble of emotions, a toxic stew of anger, hurt, and betrayal. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of uncertainty, unable to find a lifeline to cling to. Was I overreacting? Or was there really something going on between Alexandra and Julian? When we got home, I tried to confront Alexandra, but she just laughed it off, her eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "You're being paranoid," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It was just a joke." But I knew it wasn't just a joke. I knew that there was something more to it, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I tried to push the thoughts aside, but they lingered in the back of my mind like a festering wound. Over the next few days, I found myself growing more and more distant from Alexandra. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from me, and it was eating away at me like a cancer. I tried to talk to her about it, but she just denied everything, her eyes flashing with a hint of defiance. One evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I waited until Alexandra was out of the house, and then I started snooping around, searching for answers in the digital footprints she'd left behind. I checked her phone, her emails, and her social media accounts, but I couldn't find anything incriminating. Just as I was about to give up, I stumbled upon a hidden folder on her computer, labeled Private and Password Protected. I tried to crack the password, but it was too strong, a digital fortress that refused to yield to my attacks. I was about to give up when I remembered a trick that Julian had shown me once, a clever little hack that could bypass even the most secure passwords. I tried it, and to my surprise, it worked. The folder opened, revealing a series of emails between Alexandra and Julian that left no doubt about their affair. My heart sank like a stone, and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the screen in horror, my world crumbling around me like a house of cards. I printed out the emails, the words on the page searing themselves into my brain like a branding iron. I confronted Alexandra when she got home, the papers trembling in my hand like a leaf in a hurricane. She broke down, her confession spilling out of her like a dam breaking. She told me she'd been feeling unfulfilled in our marriage, that Julian had been a distraction, a way to fill the void that had been growing inside her. I listened, my mind reeling, as she spoke of her desire for excitement, for passion, for something more. I was devastated, my world crumbling around me like a house of cards. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, my breath knocked out of me. I couldn't process what I was hearing, couldn't wrap my head around the fact that my wife, my partner, my best friend had been cheating on me. As I looked at Alexandra, I saw a stranger. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, was gone, replaced by a person I didn't recognize. I felt like I'd been living a lie, like our whole marriage had been a facade, a carefully constructed illusion that had been hiding the truth. I was torn, my emotions warring with each other like rival armies. Part of me wanted to scream and yell, to lash out at Alexandra for what she'd done. Another part of me just wanted to curl up and cry, to mourn the loss of our marriage, to grieve for what could never be again. But I did neither. I just stood there, frozen in shock, as Alexandra cried and apologized. I didn't know what to say or how to respond. I was numb, my emotions locked away, inaccessible. As the days went by, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. I felt like I was walking through a fog, like I was trapped in a dream from which I couldn't wake up. I didn't know what was real or what was just a fantasy. I tried to talk to Alexandra, to work through our issues and see if we could salvage our marriage. But it was too late. The damage had been done and I couldn't forgive her. The trust was broken. The bond between us shattered. In the end, we decided to separate. It was a painful and difficult decision, but it was the only one that made sense. I couldn't stay in a marriage that had been built on lies and deceit. I needed to move on, to find a way to heal, to rediscover myself. As I gazed back on the wreckage of our marriage, I realized that it had been a slow-motion catastrophe, a disaster waiting to happen. I'd been willfully blind to the warning signs, deaf to the whispers of doubt that had been echoing in my mind. But now, I saw it all. The fissures in the facade, the fault lines in the foundation. I knew that I'd never be the same again, that I'd been forever altered by the experience. The scars would linger, a constant reminder of the pain and the heartache. But I also knew that I'd emerge from this darkness, battered but stronger, wiser and more resilient. As I reflected on our marriage, I realized that I had been living in a state of denial. I had ignored the warning signals, the subtle hints that something was amiss, and I had paid the price. But as I moved forward, I knew that I would be okay. I would heal, and I would move on. I would find a way to rebuild my life, to create a new future for myself. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, like standing on the edge of a cliff staring into the unknown. And as for Alexandra and Julian, I didn't know what would become of them. I didn't care. I was done with them, and I was ready to move on. As I started to rebuild my life, I realized that I had been living in a bubble, a hermetically sealed world that revolved around my marriage and my relationship with Alexandra. I had neglected my friends and family, taking them for granted. I started to reconnect with them, and it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. They were supportive and understanding, offering a shoulder to cry on and a listening ear. They helped me to see that I wasn't alone, that I was part of a larger community that cared about me. I also started to focus on myself, to do things that I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. I started taking art classes, and I discovered a passion for painting. The strokes of the brush were like therapy, a way to express the emotions that I couldn't verbalize. I started going to the gym, and I found that exercise helped to clear my mind, to sweat out the toxins of my past. As I looked back on my marriage, I realized that I had been living someone else's dream. I had been trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine, and it had almost destroyed me. But now I was free. I was free to be myself, to pursue my own passions and interests. I was free to create a life that was truly mine, a life that was authentic and meaningful. The journey wasn't easy, of course. There were still days when the shadows of my past lingered, when the ache of loneliness and sadness threatened to consume me. But I knew I was on the right path, slowly piecing together the fragments of my shattered heart. I dipped my toes into the dating pool, tentative and cautious. The fear of getting hurt again, of falling into the same toxic patterns that had ravaged my marriage, was ever present. But I knew I couldn't remain alone forever, stuck in a limbo of sorrow and regret. That's when I met him, a kind and gentle soul who approached me with a quiet confidence. We took things slow, our steps measured and deliberate. I was wary of rushing into anything, of surrendering to the whims of passion and drama, but as we got to know each other, I felt the stirrings of something new, something different. This was a love built on mutual respect and trust, a foundation of empathy and understanding. It was a love that didn't seek to consume me, but rather to complement me, to enhance my life rather than define it. As I gazed into the future, I knew I would be okay. I would find happiness again, and I would craft a life that was truly mine, a life that reflected my values and my passions. As I fell deeper in love with this new person, I realized I had been given a second chance, a chance to redeem myself, to learn from my past mistakes and create a relationship that was healthy and strong. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were still days when fear and uncertainty crept in, when I wondered if I was making a mistake. But I knew I couldn't let fear hold me back. I had to be brave, to take risks and trust that everything would work out. And as I did, I started to feel a sense of peace and happiness that I had never experienced before. I realized that I had been living in a state of constant anxiety and stress during my marriage, walking on eggshells, never knowing when the storm would break. But now, I was free. I was free to be myself, to love without condition, to live without fear, and in that freedom, I found a sense of peace that I had never known before. But now, I had finally broken free from the shackles of my past. I was unencumbered, untethered, and unapologetically myself. The weight of judgment and rejection, once a constant companion, had been lifted, and I was finally living life on my own terms. As I gazed into the future, I knew that I would emerge from this crucible of self-discovery stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I would find happiness again, and I would craft a life that was authentically mine, a life that reflected my values, my passions, and my dreams. It wouldn't be a cakewalk, of course. There would still be twists and turns, obstacles and challenges that would test my mettle. But I was ready for them. I was ready to face them head-on, to learn from them, and to grow as a person. I was electrified by the prospect of what lay ahead, of the new experiences and opportunities that awaited me. I was excited to meet new people, to form new connections, and to build a new life, one that was free from the toxic residue of my past. And as I stood there, bathed in the warm glow of hope and optimism, I knew that I had finally found my true north. I had finally discovered the person I was meant to be, the person I had been hiding beneath the layers of fear, anxiety, and self-doubt. I was no longer the timid, uncertain person I had been during my marriage. I was no longer the person who had been held captive by fear and anxiety. I was free, and I was finally living the life I deserved, a life that was authentic, meaningful, and mine alone.